Ich kann nicht konkret sagen, wie das dann abläuft. Dann knallt da drin und vor allem mein Kumpel ist brandgefährlich. Ne? Und der letzte ist dann diesen, ja.
This is Hans-Jürgen Rösner, who on August 16, 1988 decided to rob a Deutsche Bank branch in the small town of Gladbeck, together with his childhood friend Dieter Degowski. But things soon got out of hand. The two robbers took hostages and, trying to escape the police, drove all across West Germany and parts of the Netherlands. During their spectacular escape, they talked to several journalists and members of the press, gave the interview we just witnessed, and had their words broadcast on live television. But for some reason, they were only sporadically able to interact with the police, who didn't really do anything for most of the time. This robbery ended up making history for both the unethical behavior of the press and the sheer incompetence of the police. Not least of all because two hostages ended up dead during the 54-hour-long ordeal. So let us reconstruct Rösner and Degowski's journey and revisit a robbery that, for today's audiences, is going to seem absolutely unbelievable. This is the Gladbeck hostage crisis. The bank employees willingly handed out 120,000 Deutsche Mark. But when Rösner and Degowski tried to flee, they noticed a police car outside the bank. They had already been surrounded, because the doctor from the office above called the police. So they decided their best way out of this situation would be to take hostages and ask for more ransom money, as well as an escape car. They voiced their demands not only to the police, but were also interviewed by German TV host Hans Meiser, which resulted in this slightly comical phone call.
Wer sind Sie denn bitte?
Jawohl, der Bankräuber.
Bitte was?
Der Bankräuber.
Sie sind der Bankräuber?
Ja.
Können Sie mir sagen, welche Forderungen Sie über die 300.000 Mark hinausstellen? Was für einen Fluchtwagen wollen Sie denn haben?
Dass wir die 300.000 Mark fordern, anführen, fordern.
Wo wollen Sie denn hinfahren?
Das will ich nur sagen.
Na nun gut, man kann Sie ja mit Hubschraubern verfolgen.
Gespräch beendet.
After long negotiations, the duo took off in a prepared car, but in the later police report, their behavior was quoted as absolutely atypical, because they did not immediately try to escape, but rather went to buy alcohol and snacks first. Rösner even entered a restaurant to order meatballs and chicken, all paid from their stash of looted cash. Eventually, they did make their escape from Gladbeck in a car prepared and wiretapped by the police, but not before picking up Rösner's girlfriend, Marion Löblich, towards the end of the first day. Their next destination was Bremen, where Löblich had relatives. Upon their arrival, we saw another case of highly atypical behavior. When Rösner and Löblich went into a store to buy clothes and left Degowski alone in the car with the hostages. When Degowski then went to take a leak, the hostages were all alone for a few minutes, but the police did not intervene. Based on what the hostage takers said in the wiretapped car, the Gladbeck task force believed that the hostages would be released voluntarily, as soon as Rösner and Degowski thought the police had lost their trail. Unfortunately, this information was not relayed to the local police in Bremen, which made no attempt to hide their presence. Rösner actually tried calling the task force multiple times, but was facing bureaucratic hurdles. He was only ever able to reach the local emergency operator, who could not relay him to the people in charge. In a fit of rage, he hung up and, after that, did not attempt to contact the police again. Instead, he and his accomplice hijacked a bus with 30 passengers to trade against the police hostage.
Ja, bis jetzt ist ja noch keiner eingetroffen da. Die Polizei ist ja zu feige zu kommen.
And he was probably right, because in one of the most bizarre images of this whole incident, a boy on his bike is riding towards the bus to check out what all the fuss is about, with a police officer in the background obviously just pretending to be doing his job. Everyone had access to the bus. Neither did the police close off the scene, nor did they interact with the hostage takers. After Rösner's request to trade the 30 passengers against the police hostage was denied, he completely lost it and threatened to kill an 8-year-old girl. While the situation was still far from being diffused, luckily he didn't act on this particular threat. With no direct line of communication to the officers in charge, a journalist offered his car phone to Rösner, but in another absolute blunder, he was given the wrong number.
Geht da keiner ran? 81, dann 80.
When the bus reached the Autobahn stop Grundbergsee, Tensions were still high, but for the first time, the second robber, Degowski, gave a video interview to the press. To his right is hostage Silke Bischoff, 18 years old.
Sind Sie wirklich bereit, Leute umzubringen? Ja. Wie geht es Ihnen mit der Pistole am Hals?
Ja, eigentlich ziemlich gut dafür. Mir ist das alles gar nicht so bewusst irgendwie.
Zu jung.
Können Sie sich vorstellen, dass er wirklich abdrückt?
Nö.
Eigentlich nicht.
Nö.
Shortly after that, Rösner's girlfriend Löblich went to the restroom, and what ensued is, quite frankly, difficult to even describe. Two police officers, with no apparent orders from above, arrested Löblich and took her away in a police car. When Rösner noticed this, he threatened to kill a hostage every 5 minutes until she was returned. But the police couldn't do much, as the officer who took Löblich away from the scene switched off his radio to prevent her from listening in and only received the order to bring her back minutes later. And to add insult to injury, when he tried to unlock her handcuffs, the key broke off. Literally 1 minute before she was returned to the bus, Degowski fatally shot 14-year-old Emanuele De Giorgi, who tried to protect his little sister. And despite all the police presence, an ambulance was not available, so it had to be a group of journalists who carried the boy from the bus. And in a scene that is simply too disgusting to even show on YouTube, a journalist holds the boy's head into the flashing camera lights, because apparently that's what they all came for. Hoping the police would be more lenient there, Rösner decided to take the bus across the border into the Netherlands. However, to his surprise, the police wouldn't even start negotiations as long as there were children among the hostages. In another unpredictable move, the two bank robbers let all hostages go, except for 18-year-old Silke Bischoff and her friend Ines Voitel, who came along voluntarily, later stating that she could not turn her back on Silke. To continue their escape, German police provided this BMW 735i, which had been prepared with a special switch to deactivate the motor remotely. Using this car, they drove back south, trailed by journalists, until they reached Cologne, where another unbelievable scene unfolded. They parked their car in the Breite Straße, right in the city center, and due to the live coverage of the event, the car was soon surrounded by journalists and bystanders. Once again they gave interviews, and notably Silke Bischoff asked the police to not intervene, fearing that this might end in a bloodbath. When Rösner tried to drive off, the crowd would not move, despite his direct threats. Journalist and later editor-in-chief of Bild, Udo Röbel, helped him to disperse the crowd and even got in the car to lead the gangsters out of the city and back on the road. After the total loss of control by the police in Cologne, the officers in charge gave orders to end the hostage situation on the now closed Autobahn. Any risk to the hostages' lives was accepted, and upon closing in, the tactical unit prepared to switch off the BMW remotely. Or did they? No, of course not, because, get this, they forgot the remote. What they ended up doing instead was to just ram the car, but even that didn't work as intended, because they were unable to incapacitate Rösner. What followed were minutes of shooting, bullets flying everywhere, total chaos. And in this chaos, Rösner was hit in the thigh by a bullet, which likely made his hand twitch, shooting and killing Silke Bischoff. Whether this was an intentional act or not has never been proven, and it was at this point that Rösner simply gave up. With two hostages dead, the perpetrators Rösner and Degowski both received lifelong prison sentences, while Marion Löblich received a sentence of 9 years but only ended up serving 6. And while Degowski had been released on parole in 2018 and even received a new identity, Rösner is, at this time, still incarcerated. To no one's surprise, the police and press have also been considered largely responsible for the eventual outcome. And basically every article ever written on the events of August 1988 is quick to point out how the German press code received significant changes, most notably that a reporter may never interact with a criminal during the crime itself. What always struck me about this event, however, was not the police's incompetence, but rather their lack of any sense of responsibility. It was the press who entered the bus to communicate demands. It was a journalist who carried out the poor boy. And it was reporter Udo Röbel who likely prevented a bloodbath right in the center of Cologne. There were undercover police officers in the crowd, and they did nothing. Right, thanks for watching video number 10. This one was quite the rush because, well, I finished the script a few months ago. I edited everything over the span of a few days when I learned that Netflix actually plans to release a feature-length documentary this week. Of course, I could have just scrapped the idea for this video because Netflix is going to make my video obsolete, but since this event is something that always seemed to resonate with me during my childhood, I really just couldn't pass it on. In fact, the hostage crisis happened the week my parents got married, which is why they often brought it up in conversations. Anyways, please don't be too hard on me for the rushed visuals this time. Next video is going to be more than a slideshow again. See you then.